So the first thing we're going to do is, of course, clone our starting project, which you can find in the course resources link. And for those of you guys who want practice creating the user interface and doing the auto layout, then there's, of course, the alternative that you can work on. In other words, you've got two stubs to choose from. One stub with the screen already designed for you so you can focus on Swift programming, and one where you can practice recreating this design on your own. Now, the goal of this lesson is to set up our project and link up our storyboard to the view controller. That way, we can make our buttons interactive and show different questions on the screen. So here's our main.storyboard, and the first thing we have in our stack is a label, and then we have a true button and a false button. And finally, at the very bottom, we've got a progress view, which is styled as a progress view bar. So now all we have to do is open up the assistant editor and link up our code with our design. So firstly, I'm going to create an IB outlet from my question label as well as my progress view. And I'm going to call the top one question label. And I'm going to call my progress view simply a progress bar. All right, so we now have our two IB outlets, our question label and our progress bar. I'm going to create two more IB outlets for each of the buttons. So one from the true button, which I'm just going to call true button. And then another one from my false button, which is going to be called false button. All right, so everything on screen now has an outlet. So the final thing to do is to add an IB action, which gets triggered when either the true or the false button gets pressed. So let's start from the true button, and I'm going to call this action answer button pressed. And of course, I'm going to change the type of my sender to a UI button, and then hit connect. And now I'm going to click back and drag it back to the false button as well, so that they're both connected. All right, so now we're done with all of our linking, so we can head straight into the viewcontroller.swift and see what we have done. So we have this block of code which will be triggered whenever either of the answer buttons are pressed, and we can change everything on the screen through these four outlets. Currently, when we run our app, all that we see in our question label is just the words question text, because that's what we added here as the starting sort of placeholder values. But we want to replace that text with an actual question. And I want to pose this as a challenge to you. Without touching anything in the main.storyboard, namely the attribute inspector, can you write some code so that even though our question label starts out in our main.storyboard saying question text, as soon as the app runs, make it actually show a question. So in this case, it says 4 plus 2 is equal to 6, and then the user would have to choose whether if that's true or false. So pause the video and try to complete that challenge and have a think about which part of your code gets triggered when the app is first loaded up. All right, so here's the solution. We have this function called viewDidLoad, and already in the comments of our template, Apple already is hinting at us that this is the place where we do any additional setup after loading the view. This is the block of code that we can affect if we want something to happen as soon as the view loads up or as soon as the app appears on screen. So what we want to happen here is we want to tap into the question label and change its text property to say 4 plus 2 is equal to 6. Now if we run our app, then you can see that even though our main.storyboard starts out with question text, as soon as the view loads up, it says 4 plus 2 is equal to 6. Brilliant. Now, a single question quiz app is not most people's idea of fun, so let's jazz it up with some more questions. And to do that, I'm going to create an array. So right up here, just below my IB outlets, I'm going to create a constant called quiz, and it's going to be an array that stores 3 questions. All right, so now I have an array of strings, and I've got 3 items in here which are separated by commas. And now I can use this array to show my questions in my question label instead of having these bits of text floating around. So here's another challenge for you. Make the question label display the first question from our quiz array. So the end outcome should be the same. We should still see the same question on screen, but we can no longer use it directly like so. Pause the video and review what you learned about arrays to see if you can complete this challenge. All right, so in order to complete this challenge, we have to use our quiz array. And in order to get the first question out of our quiz, we can simply add a set of square brackets and pick out the one at 0 position, which is of course the first question in our array. Now when we run our app, we get exactly the same as before, but now we're using some more dynamic code rather than just setting it manually. Now, even though we've got 3 questions, we can't actually progress through them yet. And ideally, we'd really like our answer button pressed function to be the trigger that changes the question label.text. So in order to do this, we first need a variable to keep track of which question the user is currently reading. Let's call it question number. And we'll start it out with 0 because that would match with our 0th position, which is the first question. So now we can change this 0 from using a hard-coded 0 to using our question number. So again, if you run your app at this stage, it will work exactly the same as before, but we've now made our code even more dynamic, and we can now increase our question number by 1 every time an answer button gets pressed. So we can either write question number equals the current value of question number plus 1, or of course we can use the shortened version that we've seen before, which is just plus equals 1. So here's a question for you to play computer. What do you think would happen if we ran the app at this stage? So don't run it, just think about what might happen. Do you think it will change the quiz text every time we press the answer button because we're increasing the question number? Well, let's check it out. So when we press the true or false buttons, notice that nothing is changing about our question label.text. So what's the reason here? Well, the only place where we're changing that question label.text is of course inside our viewDidLoad block, which only gets triggered once, the first time the view loads up. So in order for this to keep changing, we actually need this line of code to be triggered again. So why don't we go ahead and create a function that captures this functionality, and we'll call it update UI. Because in all likelihood, we're probably going to need this functionality a few times. So if I Command X to cut it from there and paste it inside update UI, every single time I need that functionality, I can now call my function update UI. So I need the UI to update when the view loads up, but also after I've increased the question number. So now I've got my code in 2 places, all triggering the same function, which is to update the question label based on the current question number. So now if we run our app, you can see that when we press on these buttons, it will increase and go through our quiz questions. Now, of course, if you go beyond the 3rd question, your app will crash. And this is, of course, because we only have 3 questions. If you're requesting for the 4th one that doesn't exist, well, then we get a index out of range error. So our index, which is currently number 3, is out of the range of our quiz because it only has 0, 1, and 2. And here's a quick way of seeing what's actually going on. Notice how when your app crashes, it highlights to you the line where the fatal error, which is really dramatic for Xcode to say, but this is where the fatal error occurred, and that's what killed your app. Now, when your app crashes, you will see the debug console pop up and you will see the useful messages, usually at the top of the debug console. So if you ever are in doubt, just scroll to the very top and read what it says. Now, the other thing you can do is you can expand this little drop down list here, and you can see the value of some of the variables we have created. So currently at this point in time, when the app crashed, my question number variable was equal to 3. Now that means that I tried to pull out the quiz value at index 3, 0, 1, 2. Of course, 3 doesn't exist. So that's another way of helping you to debug and figure out what's wrong with your app. But there's no problems here. We expected that to happen. So let's go ahead and just stop our app. And in the next lesson, we're going to figure out how to not just solve this, but also how to check the user's answer and see if they got the answer right. For all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.